Ollie, the first EU Council meeting since the election, then, what do leaders need to get this done?
Yeah, so basically what they need to deliver at this meeting, this is really the top priorities, as you mentioned, is the top jobs. Because once you've established those three top jobs within the EU, the Commission President, the Foreign Policy Chief, as well as the European Council, from there everything else kind of trickles down in terms of the other commissions, but also sort of the policy priorities. So as you say, Ursula von der Leyen likely a shoo-in for the presidency, Kaja Kallas to deal with foreign policy from the Renew Party, and then Antonio Costa to do the European Council President. Now, what they also need to do, Tom, is come out with their so-called strategic agenda. Now, this is the document, Tom, that basically lays out the outline for the European policy priorities for the next 5 years for this new government within the EU. This is going to talk about some of the very familiar topics we've covered a lot here, Tom, whether it's defense, whether it's security, whether it's Ukraine, and also competitiveness. But also, Zelensky will be here in Brussels today, so we're expecting a renewed commitment from the EU. And let's also not forget, there will be the beginning of accession talks, of joining the EU from Ukraine. Those formal negotiations and talks began this week. So all that to watch for these leaders this week.
OK, there's a lot on the docket for them, isn't there? In terms of the power dynamic has shifted, hasn't it, across these EU institutions, or at least it's in the process of post-election. How is that playing out, Ollie?
Yeah, so there's, of course, the top jobs, and those are kind of the very concrete ways in which we're going to see sort of that play out. But then there's also the question about particularly Meloni and Macron. So Meloni yesterday got in front of Italian parliament and was railing against basically the EU process for appointing these top jobs. And then the next day she comes into Brussels to have those conversations. What's interesting for her is, despite this very sort of strong mandate that she has in Italy, it's interesting to see how she'll be able to exert that across the EU, because she really doesn't have a voice for the top jobs, because that's done through a qualified majority that doesn't need unanimity. On the other side, you have Macron on the sort of lame duck side of things. His sort of priorities definitely will be demoted. You know, he's one of the big advocates, probably the biggest advocate for joint debt in order to build out defense here in Europe. That will sort of fly away. Then, of course, you have the election in 2 days, and both the left and the right pose huge problems for the EU. The left with massive deficit spending, and the right who basically want to subsidize a lot of their plans within France by basically cutting their contributions to the EU. So all this hangs over the discussions as well.